Whether you fall in the camp of Avatar definitely and absolutely not being anime, or taking the Japanese stance of even Minions being anime, it is very easy to see how Avatar does very much fit into the anime style, both in the pure visual sense as well as through numerous storytelling tropes. And among many of these anime tropes stands the prolific beach episode, which in a vast majority of cases is more of a side story where the characters just take a break from all the craziness to, as the name implies, go to the beach. Some series remix the idea and have a hybrid between a vacation episode and a beach episode, but today I want to exclusively look at the beach part of the story. Historically, the beach episode has often been paired with recap episodes, and in a majority of cases are usually designed to be filler stories. And because of the fact that they are indeed filler, studios need to somehow still pull in viewers, which were predominantly high school age boys. And so, what is better for the thirsty boys than putting all the characters in swimsuits? And so, the beach episode as we know it today was born. The only time where all the rules were thrown out of the window, and essentially the only purpose of the episode was fan service. So, what happens when you mix all the not so great things about anime tropes and Avatar? Well, you've read the title, you get one of the most tragic, introspective, and all-around greatest episodes of the entire series in my opinion. And I feel like that is on full display in literally the first moments of the episode as Zuko says,
"Doing nothing is a waste of time. We're being sent away on a forced vacation."
It's almost as if the writers themselves wanted to assure us that this little escapade on the beach would soon turn into something much more important to the bigger story, and that everything we'd see for the first half of the episode is merely setup. And on top of that, another major distinction here are the parallels between Azula's and Aang's group. Again, based on the whole beach premise, for many, the immediate thought would be that this would be just that. A relaxing episode with a side story at best. And that is exactly what we see initially. As with Aang 2, we are generally just lounging around and having fun. But that would soon be turned completely upside down as Sparky Sparky Boom Man would come after them, completely throwing our expectations out of the window. So, with all that said, let us get properly stuck into these two stories and talk about what makes them so brilliant. When we open the episode, we primarily follow Zuko, where the story is indeed heavily focused on the usual whimsical shenanigans we see in Avatar. We see them head over to the beach, where we do also very much see the usual anime tropes of some thirsty boys fighting it out over Ty Lee. We see Zuko and Mei just try to relax, but their dynamic of course forbids that. And then Azula notices the game of volleyball. Though right away, I think the character roles are established incredibly well here, which I think would become very important for the campfire scene at the end of their story. So far, Ty Lee has always solved her problems through smiles, social skills, and charisma, and that is exactly what we see here. Almost as if she had the entire world figured out. She's the only one who's immediately adapted and is already lounging around, which we later learn is in large part due to her living conditions as a child, and how growing up in a very large family largely forced her to master these social cues. Zuko and Mei, on the other hand, as they often do, have a hard time finding their place, and so every interaction we see between them is pretty awkward. Zuko tries doing nice things, he brings Mei ice cream for example, but even that just blows up in his face. And then there is Azula, who in many ways I think is the wild card in their group. A common thread in this episode, which we'll be talking plenty more about later, is how this is one of very few times throughout the series where we get a proper deep dive into her character and what she's actually feeling. For instance, right as they arrive at the beach, in classic Azula fashion, she destroys a children's sandcastle because of course she does. But then we see her gaze at Mei, who's getting help from one of the guys, and she is jealous, giving us a rare look at how she does actually care for things other than power as well. If you recall, one of the first scenes we ever got with Azula was her lightning bending, where the scene explicitly painted her as a perfectionist through and through. Even a single hair out of place was enough to force her to go again. And clearly, as we've seen many times, this cold, emotionless, and meticulous approach to her character has propelled her to be one of the strongest firebenders we would ever see. But in this episode, that approach would be challenged. We see Azula notice the game of volleyball being played, and to her, this is immediately just a challenge. Instead of calling on her friends for a relaxing game, she essentially commands them to line up at once, which also neatly showcases what her role in the group is.
Ty Lee, get over here now!
We just talked about how drastically different these characters are, yet Azula can immediately pull together all of them to fight by her side, which, as we've seen many times before, just reminds us that the support she has isn't just because of some charisma or good deeds, but rather pure manipulation. And then when we get into the game itself, we see yet another aspect of Azula reinforced. She always targets the weakest link. As they hunker down in for the plan, her cold and tactical brain kicks in, as she identifies a past injury on one of her opponents. Again, for her, this is not a game, this is an enemy to destroy. And so, she aims to strike where it hurts most. And I absolutely love how this little detail further contextualizes the standoff she had with Aang's group, Uncle Iroh, and Zuko way back in Book 2, because there too she took the same exact approach. At that moment, neither Zuko or Iroh were family, they were enemies and she was ready to destroy them. And so, her strategic brain ran all the numbers, and figured that Iroh is in fact the best target to collapse this entire thing from the ground up. Pure power-wise, he might be the strongest bender there, but with Azula, power is just one variable. A variable she might not even have to take into account at all if she can make the whole group fall apart at the seams. She knew Iroh wouldn't strike back at her. She knew Zuko would become reckless if she struck Iroh, and she knew that all of Team Avatar are righteous. So even though at that point Iroh was technically their enemy, they would still make sure that he's okay before they ever properly retaliated. And so she does exactly that. She strikes Iroh just like she does with the girl here. Her opponent is only as powerful as the weakest link, and if you want to extend that even further, I think this also very much applies to the final Agni Kai. Though yes, keeping up with the, so far, lighter tone of the episode, Azula's villainous and very over-the-top proclamation that they would be destroyed is promptly cut off as she simply says,
That was fun.
And here too, I think there's an argument to be made that, to her, as much as it is a joke played off for the viewers, this sort of reaction was completely normal and not over the top at all. I think in her mind, she utterly destroyed them, and so she will revel in that victory, even if for a brief moment. But we then hear of the party, where we once again get a brief insight into how Azula's mind works, as she decides to not tell them who they really are. And then over dinner, she says just that. She wanted to see how people would treat them if they didn't know they were royalty. Lo and Lee would repeat this a lot throughout this episode, which the cast largely writes off for comedy's sake, but they say that Ember Island is a magical place and is all about offering people a blank slate. For Azula, somewhat tragically, it does turn out to be all about repeating past mistakes. She arrives as a nobody, she's given the chance to relax, but she doesn't. At every opportunity, she's back to her old ways of controlling everything and everyone. Zuko, on the other hand, is a much different story. The third season of his story is all about coming to terms with what he has done, finding his true purpose, and of course, trying to come to terms with his betrayal of Iroh. And I don't think us returning to Ember Island after Zuko joins up with the gang and immediately preceding his reunion with Iroh is a coincidence. Throughout this little Ember Island duology, I think we are purposely being shown the difference between Zuko and Azula. How one falls back into their self-destructive ways, while the other, through thick and thin, manages to overcome that. And before we delve headfirst into that, there is still a party that needs heading up. And yet again, we see the pedantic and almost mathematical nature of Azula as she shows up at the party at dusk because they said that the party would be from dusk till dawn. This of course sets up her little mini dating arc in this episode, which was teased back on the beach, where we also get the famous
That's a sharp outfit, Chan. You could puncture the hull of an Empire-class Fire Nation battleship, because it's so sharp.
But broadly speaking, we see her fail miserably at socializing and once again jealously look at Ty Lee. And because this is Azula, of course she'll try to play the situation to her favor, telling Ty Lee that the only reason why she has so many admirers is because she makes it easy. But, unlike all the past times where Azula would revel in maintaining her superiority, she actually apologizes and tells Ty Lee that she is jealous. And this is where I think the tragedy of Azula's story is on full display. because even the moment she manages to connect with someone, she just can't help but fall back into her superiority complex. We've seen many times that the only people Azula truly has on her side are those she can either wield power over, or the ones she essentially manipulates into joining her. But here, she doesn't have any of that. She purposefully avoided saying that she's a princess of the Fire Nation. And she can't really press this guy's buttons because unlike everyone else by her side, he just seems to be drifting through life at his own pace. She tried sciencing her way through the relationship with Ty Lee's help, but that's simply not how it works. As far as she knows, he doesn't have any deep-rooted insecurities she can leverage, and so she is just powerless. This is one of those fundamental tragedies in Azula's story where her power ultimately does not equate to actual power at all. Despite her iron fist control over her allies, all of them betray her. Despite her social status and standing, she never receives any grand coronation. Despite her unimaginable power, her little brother who she always laughed at still comes out on top. And I think these little scenes here demonstrate that absolutely beautifully. And similarly, Zuko too briefly falls back into his insecurities as he sees Mei chatting to one of the guys. Obviously, Zuko has pretty serious abandonment issues, so this sort of outburst is not surprising in the least. Unlike Azula, he does have a very short fuse, so while both of them just had their core personalities challenged, Zuko's reaction is far more explosive. Not helped by the fact that Mei just straight up says that we're done, which yet again brings up those same abandonment issues Zuko has. And so, he is once again alone, wandering through the dark night as memories of his childhood flood back. He returns to their childhood vacation home where the doors are locked, symbolizing how, despite his grand return to the royal family, he is still an outsider. Zuko, however, proceeds to brute force his way in, again speaking to much of his story leading up to this point. He walks into the house that is filled with memories, which is now grey and covered with cobwebs, almost as if forgotten to time and left behind, contrasted by those warm memories flooding back in. And then we get the scene that symbolizes all of that. Zuko putting his hand over the clay imprint, essentially just saying that he wants to return back there, when he could just run around those grassy hills with his uncle and when he still had his mother. But then, Azula comes in saying that they should return back to the beach and that this place is depressing, which in many ways goes to speak about her pull on Zuko as he immediately stands up and leaves the handprint behind. It's like her presence alone is enough to pull him out of that fantasy where everything was happy and back into that cold reality where he still has to face his demons about betraying his uncle. It's like she is a constant walking reminder of what he did wrong. And then we get to the campfire, which in my mind is easily one of the best written sequences in the entire series. Just how raw this dialogue is something else entirely, as we just see them unload on each other one after another. All of that begins with Ty Lee asking Zuko why he's burning the family photos. Not surprisingly, Zuko blows up saying that he just doesn't care, that Ty Lee doesn't even know him, and that she should just mind her own business. Again, this is just Zuko's paradoxical nature of dealing with his abandonment and trauma. He pushes people away. We've already seen that with Iroh when he decided to leave on his own. And despite Mei trying to play the peacekeeper, Zuko keeps going on his tirade, calling Ty Lee a circus freak. As far as Mei goes, I do think that her role throughout the story in many ways is very much of a peacekeeper. Sure, she fought alongside Azula throughout much of it, but even back in Ba Sing Se when she let Bosco go, she never really wanted to hurt anyone. Azula too responds exactly how you'd expect, not picking up on the social cues whatsoever and simply laughing at Zuko's insults. Because to her, yeah, Ty Lee is not really to be taken seriously. And that is on full display as she essentially dismisses her before even saying a word.
Here we go.
Though speaking of Ty Lee, similar to Azula, this is one of few times in the series where we see a different side of her, as she breaks down saying that for her entire life she's been afraid of being just one of a set. Growing up with 6 identical sisters, she always wanted to be independent and different, and joining the circus was her way of doing that. To me, this was always one of those weird times where your usually unnaturally positive and optimistic friend suddenly becomes serious, because it completely shatters all of your perceptions of the character. At the back of our minds, we know that each and every person alive has just as complicated of a life as we do, and I think this complete 180 of Ty Lee is a very good reminder of that. Sure, she always seems very joyous, but it's clearly not as simple as that. And as if that wasn't enough, May butts into the conversation, saying that Ty Lee has attention issues and is just trying to make up for that now. And now Ty Lee is the one firing back at May, saying that it's still better than not feeling anything at all. But it's when Zuko jumps back in that things truly reach a boiling point. He says that May shouldn't be keeping all of her emotions bottled up and finally express something for once. And it's then that May immediately undermines the whole tragic past trope. So far, this whole campfire talk has obviously brought up a ton of past wounds and recontextualized a lot of what we know about the characters. May, on the other hand, simply explains that she doesn't have that. She doesn't have a sob story, she grew up with a supporting family and always got what she wanted. And this is one of those things that I honestly think is severely underutilized in storytelling. We have a bajillion tragic heroes, but what about the ones that already have it all? I do think that this sort of storytelling naturally lends itself much better to villain stories because losing it all is much more interesting, but still, I absolutely loved how May was portrayed here. And while Azula tries spinning it into May's family too being problematic, she then blows up and shuts it down right away. And again, Ty Lee is back to her usual happy persona, saying that everyone should calm down or the stress will give them bad skin. And finally, Zuko spills the beans on everything. He tells them that his skin is the last thing he's worried about and that his father already passed judgment on that. Then saying that forever he just wanted his father's love and to return home. But now that he's here, he's still not happy. And of course, Azula realizing that Zuko is still in her back pocket, we get a brief shot of her smirking. But then when they start asking who Zuko is angry at, the sequence is genuinely perfect. As the trio's voices circle around Zuko, almost as if pushing him up against a wall and leaving his head scrambled, simply asking, "Who are you angry at?" And as the framing gets more and more claustrophobic, Zuko finally proclaims that he is angry at himself, with his emotions literally pouring into the raging fire. And again, the fact that we'd return to Ember Island now with Aang by his side, I absolutely love how this entire mini-arc is building towards Zuko's reunion with Iroh. Because as far as I'm concerned, this "I'm angry at myself" is almost exclusively in reference to his betrayal at Ba Sing Se, and is in many ways a crucial turning point in his story. But the scene isn't over just yet, because Azula is still yet to speak. And here we get a few more very interesting tidbits. Similar to May, she too claims to not have any sob stories or anything like that. But no more than a second later, she herself says that her own mother thought she was a monster. It is played off as a joke, but in my mind, this is nothing more than Azula being in complete denial, which would be on full display before her final Agni Kai, where it's exactly her mother that would appear to her. Clearly, Azula is in large part a product of her not-so-great upbringing, and as much as she may try to deny her past, her devils are always with her. And her coping mechanism? Control and power. And surprise, surprise, it is then that she decides that they could swing by the party once again and basically trash the place. And so with that, the haha let's spend the day on the beach episode suddenly turned into the most raw and emotional exchange around the campfire that, on the Fire Nation side at least, we've basically ever seen, with everyone in both direct and indirect ways very much facing their demons head on. But wait, there's more. Remember how at the top of this video I said that this episode tells two stories? Well, yeah, we've still got the Gaang's B-plot to talk about. Very much paralleling Zuko and the others, their story too begins with them swimming and generally messing around. And remember that at this point in the story, the entire world believes Aang to be dead. That is, until he is spotted and the Fire Nation soldiers send a high alert message to the Fire Lord. On the face of it, this is classic Avatar. He is seen by some Fire Nation soldiers, they alert someone more important, and a fight breaks out, right? But no, this is the endgame of the story. We are on the Fire Lord's home turf, and leaking Aang's survival could put the invasion mission in jeopardy. In hindsight, we of course know that it was leaked regardless, but at this point in the story, it is still a huge deal. But again, it's not as straightforward as it seems because the Raven is overtaken by none other than Sparky Sparky Boom Man. And again, this is one of those great subversions in Avatar because in like 99% of cases you'd be like, oh cool, the Fire Nation Raven that could have leaked the plan was caught, great. But no, here is this guy who is a literal telepathic firebender and is an assassin hired by Zuko to kill Aang with nothing left behind as evidence. So again, an absolute far cry from the promised fun beach episode. And because of how character-centric this episode is, purely the reveal of Sparky Sparky Boom Man following the Gaang should suffice, right? And again, no, because as night falls, the Gaang is indeed attacked. I've talked about this exact scene in past videos, but genuinely, this is one of my favorite fights in the entire series. The choreography and the sound design in this one is pure perfection and frankly is deserving of a video of its own. The way complete silence is leveraged here just makes everything hit so much harder, and I'd seriously invite all of you to rewatch this fight and pay attention to the sound design specifically. Unlike most other battles, there is barely any music at all. Instead, the deafening silence is cut through by the, at this point, ridiculously powerful Gaang all throwing their best at the Sparky Sparky Boom Man. And even aside from all that, the fact that Aang also leverages neutral Jing in what is a very deliberate callback to Boomy, all of this just further drives home the message of, buddy, this is no beach episode. The story is moving forward, and it is moving forward big time. And while the fight as a whole is ultimately just a bit of a benchmark for Sparky Sparky Boom Man, I do think that it is a perfect complement to the Ember Island story where Zuko is very much confronting his past, which is also very directly shown to us as it's because of him that Sparky Sparky Boom Man is pursuing the Gaang in the first place. But yes, this time for real, that is the beach. An episode that starts off with your typical tropey anime beach story, which was apparently actually going to have more fan service originally but was tuned down by Nickelodeon, and ends with some of the most complex character dynamics in the entire story. This might be my tinfoil speaking, but I seriously think that the naming scheme and the setting of the episode was deliberate, as I seriously can't help but notice just how many anime tropes are subverted in this one. It genuinely feels like the entire vacation side story vibe was purposely leading us into a false sense of security, just to subvert all of that, both with a very physical threat as well as the emotional turmoil we see on Zuko's side. So, with that said, if you join me, I'll be here waiting for the next show that takes some of the classic anime tropes and just decides to completely annihilate them. Like, for example, nobody likes recap episodes, right? Wait, hold on. And that's the video. Oh boy, it feels so good to be talking about Avatar again. And frankly, considering it's still my favorite series of all time, this channel desperately needs more content on it. So keep an eye out for that in the future, especially with a particular Netflix series coming soon. But with that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!